The sound of his voice froze me in place. My heart pounded, my stomach twisted, and in that moment I knew. I had been caught. I had been laughing just seconds before, my fingers wrapped around a glass of wine, the warmth of another man's hand resting against mine. The glow of the candlelight made everything feel surreal, like a dream I never wanted to wake up from. But the second I heard my husband's voice, that dream shattered into a million jagged pieces. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There he was, standing just a few feet away, his eyes locked onto mine, his face unreadable. But I didn't need words to know what he was feeling. It was all there: betrayal, devastation, rage barely held back beneath a mask of control. My hands went cold. The room suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too small. The air between us was thick, suffocating. My affair partner shifted beside me, his grip loosening, sensing the change before even looking up. When he did, a smirk played at the corner of his lips, as if this was just another inconvenient situation to handle, as if none of this was real. My husband's gaze flickered to him for a split second before settling back on me. His jaw clenched, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. But he didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. That was almost worse. His silence was deafening. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my throat had closed up. My mind raced, searching for words that didn't exist. How could I explain this? How could I justify something so obviously wrong? His voice came again, quiet, controlled, but sharp as a knife. How long? It was just 2 words, but they cut through me like a blade. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I saw the way his body tensed, the way his breathing slowed like he was forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't here to argue. He wasn't here to fight. He was here because the person he had trusted most in the world had just destroyed him. The man beside me leaned back casually, swirling the wine in his glass as if he were watching a movie. "Guess the secret's out," he murmured, his tone amused. I wanted to slap him. My husband's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes colder than I had ever seen them. He let out a breath, slow and measured, then shook his head. "You don't need to come home." The finality in his voice sent a chill through me. My stomach lurched, panic rising like a tidal wave. "Wait!" But he was already turning, already walking away. And just like that, the life I had built, the marriage I thought I could hold on to while chasing something else, was crumbling before my eyes. I had lost him, and I had no one to blame but myself. His eyes didn't leave mine. There was no yelling, no accusations, no dramatic outburst, just silence. A silence so heavy it pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. He didn't need to say a word. His expression alone told me everything. The man who had loved me, trusted me, built a life with me, was standing there, watching it all fall apart. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My hands trembled as I reached toward him, desperate to close the space between us, to fix something that was already shattered beyond repair. "It's not—" I stopped myself, realizing there was no excuse, no lie that could make this moment any less real. He blinked, slow and deliberate, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. His fingers flexed at his sides, his whole body rigid with restraint. The muscles in his jaw tightened as he finally spoke, his voice even but laced with something colder than I had ever heard from him. "How long?" 2 words, simple, director. But they sent a wave of panic crashing over me. I hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. His lips pressed together, and he let out a sharp breath through his nose. It was the only sign that what he had just seen had affected him, that what I had done had truly wounded him in a way I couldn't take back. The man beside me, the one who had seemed so intoxicating just moments ago, let out a low chuckle. He leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. "Well," he said, taking a sip of his wine, "I guess that clears things up." I turned toward him, my stomach twisting in disgust. Was this just a game to him? Just another moment he could brush off, another thrill to add to his collection? He didn't care that my life was unraveling right in front of me. He had never cared. I looked back at my husband, my heart hammering. "Please," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. His expression didn't change. No flicker of emotion, no sign that he had even heard me. He just stared, like he was looking at a stranger. And maybe to him, I was. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and typed something quickly. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I didn't need to check it. I already knew. His final words were quiet, almost too soft to hear, but they cut through me like a blade. "You don't need to come home." He turned and walked away. No second glance, no hesitation. The moment the door shut behind him, I felt my whole world collapse. I had destroyed everything, and now I had nowhere to go. She slammed the hotel room door behind her, pressing her back against it as her breath came in shallow gasps. Her hands trembled, fingers still clutching her phone, but there were no new messages, no missed calls, nothing. The silence was worse than screaming. The weight of what had just happened crashed down on her. He was gone. He had seen everything. He had looked at her like she was nothing. The man who had once been her world had walked away, and she had let it happen. The affair partner sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone like nothing had changed. No panic, no guilt, no regret. He hadn't lost anything. He wasn't the one who had just destroyed his life. She turned to him, her voice shaky. "Did you know?" He didn't look up. Know what? That he was coming, that he would be here. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he finally met her gaze. Would it have changed anything? Her stomach twisted. The way he spoke, so detached, so unconcerned, made her feel sick. "He just left me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Yeah," he said, tossing his phone onto the nightstand. "What did you expect?" The words hit her like a slap. She stared at him, realization creeping in like a slow, suffocating fog. This wasn't love. This was never love. He wasn't someone she could turn to, someone who would hold her through the chaos. He had been nothing more than an escape, and now the escape was over. She sank onto the chair by the window, pressing her fingers against her temples. "I have to talk to him." A low chuckle came from the bed. Good luck with that. Ignoring him, she unlocked her phone and pulled up her husband's contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. He wouldn't answer. She knew he wouldn't, but she had to try. The line rang, once, twice, then straight to voicemail. Tears burned in her eyes as she tried again. Nothing. A message appeared on her screen. "Unknown number. All communication will go through legal representation from now on. Do not contact him directly." Her breath hitched as she read the words over and over, each time making them feel more permanent. Her chest tightened. No second chances, no pleading, no room for explanation. Her hands shook as she clutched the phone, her vision blurring. "I ruined everything," she whispered. The man on the bed let out an amused sigh, stretching his arms above his head. "Well, that's dramatic." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. And for the first time since this all started, she truly saw him. She grabbed her bag. "Where are you going?" he asked, lazily watching her. She swallowed hard, gripping the handle tighter. "Anywhere but here." He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The sound of his breath filled the car, slow and controlled, the only thing keeping him from completely losing it. His heart pounded in his chest, his entire body tense, every muscle coiled tight with restrained anger. He had replayed the moment in his head 100 times already. Her laughter, her hand resting on another man's arm, the way she froze when she saw him standing there. A part of him wanted to turn back, to demand answers, to force her to explain how the woman he loved had become a stranger. Another part of him, the smarter part, knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing she said could undo what he had seen. Nothing could erase the image burned into his mind. He pulled into the parking lot of a hotel and killed the engine. The silence was deafening, but he welcomed it. Anything was better than the chaos running through his head. He sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, his fingers tapping absently against the dashboard. How had he been so blind? The little things started making sense now. The late nights on her phone, the way she had become distant, colder, making excuses, pushing him away. The moments when she should have been happy but wasn't. He had asked her before, had tried to reach her, but she always had an excuse. Stress, exhaustion, nothing to worry about. And like a fool, he had believed her. He had trusted her. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. He had spent years building a life with her, giving her everything he could, sacrificing time, energy, and sleep so they could have a future. And in return, she had chosen someone else, someone who didn't know her the way he did, someone who hadn't been there through the hard times, who hadn't held her when she cried, who hadn't promised forever and meant it. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He didn't need to look to know who it was. She was trying to reach him. He picked up the phone, stared at the screen, and let it ring until it went silent. A second later, a voicemail notification popped up. Then another, then a text. "Please, just talk to me. I need to explain." Explain. What? That she had destroyed everything? That she had thrown away their marriage like it meant nothing? His fingers hovered over the screen before he locked the phone and tossed it onto the seat beside him. He wasn't going to let her pull him back in, not this time. Instead, he pulled up his contacts and scrolled until he found the number he needed. He tapped the screen, pressing the phone to his ear as it rang. Matthew Carter speaking. His voice was calm, professional. "I need legal advice," he said, his voice hollow. "My wife cheated on me." She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her hands ached, but she barely noticed. The house stood before her, dark and silent. No lights, no movement, nothing to welcome her home. Her chest tightened as she stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the pavement. The cold air bit at her skin, but the real chill came from within. She climbed the porch steps, hesitating for just a second before pressing her palm against the door, as if she could still feel the warmth of the life she had taken for granted. She turned the handle. It didn't budge. Panic flickered in her chest. She tried again, jiggling it harder this time, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Her keys, of course. She fumbled through her bag, fingers shaking as she pulled them out and shoved one into the lock. It didn't fit. Her stomach dropped. He had changed the locks. She stepped back, pressing a hand to her mouth. He was serious. He wasn't just angry. He was shutting her out completely. She banged on the door, ignoring the way her voice cracked. "Please," she whispered, then louder. "Please, open the door." No answer, no movement inside. The house might as well have been abandoned. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She grabbed it desperately, hoping for his name, hoping for a chance. Unknown number, find somewhere else to stay. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself against the railing. The message blurred as tears filled her eyes. He was done with her. She had expected anger, yelling, maybe even a bitter fight. But this cold finality, it was worse than she had imagined. She turned and walked back to the car, her body numb. She dialed her best friend's number, pressing the phone to her ear as it rang. A sigh. Then a voice that lacked the warmth it once held. "What do you want?" Her throat tightened. "I need a place to stay." Silence. "You really did it, didn't you?" She closed her eyes. "Please, Emily, I just need a place for tonight." Another pause. Then finally, "Come over." Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. She had burned too many bridges, and this was just another reminder of how much she had lost. When she arrived, Emily let her in without a word. She barely made it inside before collapsing onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I ruined everything." Emily crossed her arms. "Yeah, you did." The truth stung more than she thought it would. Her phone buzzed again. She grabbed it, heart racing. It was him. For a second, hope flickered until she saw the message, "The lawyer will be in touch." Her world collapsed around her. She sat at the cafe table, fingers tangled together, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The door opened and she looked up immediately, breath catching in her throat. He was here. He walked in with the same confidence she had always admired, but there was something different now, something colder. He didn't scan the room for her. He knew exactly where she was sitting, and when his eyes met hers, she felt the weight of every mistake pressing down on her chest. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat without a word. No greeting, no small talk, just silence. Her throat tightened as she forced herself to speak. "Thank you for meeting me." He nodded once, but his expression remained unreadable. He leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, waiting. She swallowed hard. "I don't deserve another chance," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But I needed to tell you the truth. No excuses, no justifications." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "I ruined us." The words cut her, but she knew they weren't enough. "I was selfish. I let myself believe I was missing something, when all along I had everything I ever needed right in front of me." His fingers curled against the table, but still he didn't speak. She pushed forward, desperate to get everything out. "I didn't come here to beg. I came here to tell you that I'm going to fix myself, whether you're in my life or not." His eyes flickered with something she couldn't read. "I've started therapy," she continued. "I blocked him. I've told my family what I did. I'm not running from this anymore." A long silence stretched between them. Finally he exhaled, looking away for a moment before his gaze returned to hers. "You think that changes anything?" His voice was calm, steady, but it carried a weight that made her stomach twist. "No," she admitted. "I know it doesn't." Rubbed a hand across his jaw. "I don't trust you." She flinched but nodded. "I don't know if I ever will again." Her fingers clenched in her lap. "I understand." He studied her for a long moment, and then, for the first time since he had arrived, his posture shifted, a small crack in the armor. "If we try this," he said, "there are rules." Her breath hitched. "Therapy, complete honesty, no rushing. And if I feel like I can't do this anymore, I walk away. No second chances after that." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Okay." Another silence. Then, almost reluctantly, he reached for his coffee and took a sip. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. But it was something. She sat across from him, barely breathing as she waited for his answer. The weight of everything they had been through sat between them, heavier than the silence that filled the air. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, as if holding herself together was the only thing keeping her from breaking apart completely. He exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the edge of his cup. His expression was unreadable, his posture relaxed, but she knew better. She had spent years learning his every movement, every habit. And right now, he was deciding if she was worth the effort, deciding if there was anything left to save. "You want to fix this," he said finally, his voice measured. "Yes," she whispered. "More than anything." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "Why?" The question stung, but she knew she had to face it. She had spent so long running, making excuses, justifying what she had done. That wasn't an option anymore. "Because I love you," she admitted, her voice raw. "Because I know I hurt you in a way I can never take back. Because I was selfish and I was wrong. And because I don't want to spend the rest of my life knowing I destroyed the one thing that mattered most." He was quiet for a long time, watching her, his eyes searching for something. Maybe sincerity, maybe regret, maybe a reason to believe her. She wasn't sure if he would find it. "I can't just pretend this never happened," he said, his voice lower now, steadier. "I can't wake up tomorrow and be the same man I was before I walked into that hotel." "I don't expect that," she said quickly. "I don't expect anything except the chance to prove that I still belong in your life." His lips pressed into a thin line. There are conditions. She nodded, bracing herself. Therapy, transparency, no more lies, no more excuses. Done. His jaw clenched. And if at any point I feel like this isn't working, if I wake up one day and realize I can't move past this, I walk away, and you won't fight me. A lump formed in her throat. She swallowed hard. I won't fight you. His fingers curled slightly on the table, but for the first time there was something there. Hesitation, maybe even a flicker of hope. We take it slow, he said finally. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He lifted his coffee cup, taking a sip, his gaze still on her. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't an immediate promise of love or forgiveness, but it was something. A second chance, even if it was fragile, even if it came with conditions. For now, that was enough.